With just a month until their wedding, Daniel Miller and Sarah Jenkins were trapped in a cycle of endless arguments. The reason was always the same. She wanted to have a child with her mentor's son. "It's just IVF, Daniel. I won't have any physical relationship with him," she'd plead. "My mentor is on his deathbed, and his greatest wish is to see his son, Leo, happy with a child of his own. He has no one else to turn to, so he asked me." Daniel had long since moved past the initial shock and anger he felt upon hearing this ridiculous proposal, and now, all that remained was a profound sense of helplessness. "We're getting married in a month, Sarah, and you want to go have a baby with another man. Don't you see how insane that is?" His eyes were bloodshot. Daniel had been holding in for so long, but he finally broke, letting tears stream down his cheeks. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. It was the first time she had ever seen him cry. She was about to say something when her phone buzzed with a notification. She glanced down at the screen, and when she looked back up at him, the complex emotions in her eyes had vanished, replaced by her usual cool detachment. "I have to go. You should take some time to calm down." As Daniel watched her walk away, he had a sudden, stark realization. In all their years together, he had always been the one watching her back. In college, Sarah was the notorious ice queen, the most sought-after girl on campus. Yet she turned down every guy who asked her out. She finally shut down all advances with a single, decisive statement. She wasn't interested in dating during college. Her untouchable aura made most guys give up, but not Daniel. He pursued her relentlessly, wearing her down until she finally agreed to be his girlfriend. Even after years together, she remained distant, but Daniel was never discouraged, always acting like a ray of sunshine, trying to warm her up. He just never imagined she would disregard his feelings so completely as to make a request like this. His phone suddenly vibrated. He looked down and saw a picture message from Leo. It was a screenshot of an iMessage conversation between Leo and Sarah. "Leo, Sarah, my dad's not going to make it. Can we just forget about Daniel for now and go through with the IVF? Please." And Sarah's reply was, "Okay, I'm on my way." Daniel felt like he'd been struck by lightning. Now he knew why Sarah had left in such a hurry. He couldn't articulate the feeling, only that a crushing weight of emotions was pressing down on his chest, making it hard to breathe. He wanted to scream, to break down and sob, but he was utterly drained of strength, unable to release any of it. He looked up at his reflection in the mirror and saw a stranger. He hadn't always been like this. Everyone who knew him used to say he was bright and full of life. But the man staring back at him now had a sorrow etched between his brows as dark and permanent as spilled ink, a ghost of his former self. Loving Sarah had twisted him into someone he no longer recognized, and it hadn't earned him her companionship, but rather her decision to have a child with another man on the eve of their wedding. A reckless thought sparked in his mind. If she cared so little for their relationship and their marriage, then to hell with it all. With that thought, he took a deep breath, picked up his phone, and composed a Facebook post. After hiding it from Sarah's feed, he hit send, getting married in a month. Now accepting applications for a new bride. Who's in? Most people assumed he was joking, filling the comments with playful banter. No one took him seriously. Just as he was starting to feel dejected, his phone rang. Chloe Davis. Seeing that name after so long made Daniel freeze for a second. He and Chloe Davis went way back. They were childhood friends. In school, she was the campus beauty and he was the campus heartthrob, but they were total frenemies, bickering their way from kindergarten all the way through high school. Their constant back and forth only ended when they went to different universities in different cities. Then in college, he fell for Sarah at first sight, spending his winter and summer breaks in her city just to be near her. After graduation, he moved to Seattle permanently for her, and he hadn't seen Chloe since. Their only contact was a few weeks ago when he posted on Facebook about finally marrying the woman he loved. She had left an odd comment. What if you didn't get married? He'd assumed she was just trying to start something and ignored it. He never expected she'd be the first one to actually call him about his post. Daniel braced himself for her mockery as he answered, but she didn't ask a single question, getting straight to the point. "Daniel, if you're serious about wanting a new bride, what about me?" A dead silence hung in the air after she spoke. Daniel wasn't sure what her angle was, but he knew she was, objectively, the most suitable candidate. Their families were on equal footing, and they knew everything about each other. After a long pause, he finally spoke. "Okay, what are your terms?" "No terms, really. Just one thing. Since we're getting married, you can change my contact name in your phone from Annoying Pest to Wife." The request was so simple, it caught Daniel off guard. He had to confirm. That's it, she said. And also, I want everything a real married couple has. This second condition surprised Daniel even more. He had assumed she was only agreeing because of pressure from her family to get married. For years, he had chased after Sarah, and seeing she had no real desire to marry, he never pushed. He felt lucky just to have one over the ice queen and didn't dare ask for more. But his grandfather's health had been declining recently, and he was holding on to see Daniel get married. That's why he'd finally proposed to Sarah, only for her to hit him with this insane request as the date drew near. He gripped his phone tighter. I wasn't planning on a fake marriage either. If we do this, it's for real. A light laugh came from the other end of the line. If that's the case, I'll drive to Seattle and pick you up. We can talk about when to get the license and plan the ceremony. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Give me 2 weeks. I need to take care of some things here first. He didn't have to say what things. They both knew he meant Sarah. If this was going to be a real marriage, he had to make a clean break with his past. So Chloe didn't press him. After hanging up, the first thing Daniel did was change her contact name in his phone. Staring at the contact, now labeled wife, a bitter, ironic smile touched his lips. Fine, Sarah. If you can go behind my back to have a baby with another man, then I can go behind yours and find a new bride. Sarah didn't come home for the next few days, and Daniel didn't ask where she was. He just quietly contacted his friends and asked them to return the wedding invitations he'd sent out. She had said she didn't want a big fuss, so they had only planned a small ceremony with a few close friends. His friends were shocked to be told the wedding was off and that he needed the invitations back. What do you mean, canceled? We thought you guys were rock solid. Hearing their questions, Daniel felt a wave of bitterness. Rock solid? Was it the stability of him chasing her while she remained as cold as ever? If so, then yes, it was incredibly stable. The only constant in their relationship had been his devotion, never hers. She was always like a goddess on a pedestal, coolly observing as he fell deeper and deeper in love. But now he was done. In the end, he decided not to hide it and just told him the truth. The bride has changed. His announcement was met not with shock, but with laughter and jokes. Clearly, none of his friends believed him. It made sense, though. He had loved Sarah so much for so long, always ignoring her cold shoulder. If anyone else had acted the way he had and then suddenly called it all off, he wouldn't have believed them either. But it didn't matter. He would prove to everyone, with his actions, that this time he was serious. After collecting the last of the invitations, Daniel went home. Not long after, Sarah finally returned. For someone usually so pristine and composed, her white blouse was wrinkled, her eyes were bloodshot, and she looked utterly exhausted. He could tell at a glance that she was in a bad state. The moment she saw him, her first words coincidentally aligned with what he'd just spent his day doing. We need to recall the wedding invitations. My mentor passed away. I have to observe a mourning period for at least 6 months, so we can't get married. As she said it, Sarah braced herself for an argument. She knew how much he'd been pushing for this wedding, how his grandfather was waiting for it. So she expected him to be upset. She had her responses ready, but he just looked at her calmly. I understand. I'm sorry for your loss. Sarah felt a slight jolt of surprise. It was strange, but ever since that night, he seemed like a different person. His attitude was off, but she was too exhausted to dwell on it. She rubbed her temples and spoke again. The memorial service is today. He mentioned you before he passed. I'd like you to come with me to pay your respects. Daniel didn't like Leo, but he had nothing against the kind professor. Besides, he doubted Professor Vance ever imagined his son would resort to something like this to fulfill his dying wish. Out of respect for the deceased, he nodded in agreement. After Sarah showered and changed, she took Daniel to Professor Vance's funeral. Daniel and Sarah had just arrived when they heard a choked, tearful voice call out, "Sarah?" Daniel looked over and saw Leo, dressed in somber colors, collapsing to the ground with tears streaming down his face. "Leo!" Sarah cried out, rushing to his side in an instant. She gently cradled him in her arms and, without even looking up at Daniel, said, "You go on ahead and pay your respects. I'll stay here with him for a bit." Seeing her gentle, concerned expression, anyone who didn't know better would have assumed Leo was her boyfriend, not him. In the past, a scene like this would have sent Daniel into a jealous fit. But now he just glanced at them, looked away without a word, and walked into the main hall. Sarah seemed surprised by his lack of reaction and glanced up at him, that strange feeling from before returning. But then Leo whispered her name, and her attention snapped back to him. She helped him over to a nearby seat and began comforting him softly. Daniel respectfully paid his respects to the late professor, bowing his head 3 times before walking over to a pale-faced woman standing nearby. "Mrs. Vance, I'm so sorry for your loss." Mrs. Vance looked up, gave a small nod, and took Daniel's hand. "You must be Sarah's boyfriend. Thank you for coming. I heard you two were about to be married. She's such a loyal girl, offering to observe a mourning period for my husband. It must be very difficult for you." Daniel just listened quietly, saying nothing about the absurd plans Sarah and her son had cooked up. But Mrs. Vance could see the pain in his eyes and sighed deeply. "We watched Sarah grow up, you know. My husband was her mentor all through her undergraduate and doctoral studies. She's a very sentimental person, which is why she made this decision. Please don't blame her." Since he'd already decided to change the bride, there was no point in blaming anyone. "I understand," he said. Seeing how reasonable he was being, Mrs. Vance couldn't help but add more. "And please don't mind Leo. I know he clings to her, but I can tell she doesn't feel that way about him. She's very fond of you." Daniel stiffened slightly at her words. Fond of him? He certainly hadn't seen any evidence of it. Seeing his disbelief, Mrs. Vance pressed on. "I'm not lying, son. My husband and I used to worry she'd bury herself in her medical research and never find someone. Then you came along. She never said much outright, but in front of us, she'd always casually bring you up, mentioning how she'd run into you, or some delicious meal you'd made for her, or some silly thing you did to try and win her over. It always sounded like she was complaining, but we knew she was just in love and didn't even realize it herself." Mrs. Vance recounted all these little signs of affection that Sarah had never once shown to his face, but all Daniel could feel was a bitter irony. Maybe the Oldham would have been thrilled to hear this, but now, it just felt like a cruel joke. If Sarah truly loved him, why had he never felt it? Why was he always the one chasing her, while she never once slowed down to wait for him? If she loved him, how could she agree to have a baby with another man? The moment she said yes to Leo, it was all over. It was well and truly over between them. Throughout the entire service, Sarah stayed by Leo's side. By the time it ended, a steady rain had begun to fall, and the other guests were leaving. Finally, she pulled her car up in front of Daniel and tossed out 2 flat, emotionless words. "Get in." He started to move toward the car, but the passenger window rolled down, revealing Leo already in the seat next to her. Mrs. Vance was in the back. Before Daniel could say a word, Leo spoke in a choked voice. "Sarah, I want to go to the cemetery to see my dad. Just you, me, and my mom. Is that okay?" Mrs. Vance was the first to react, frowning. "Leo, don't be like this." Her simple words seemed to strike a nerve, and Leo burst into loud sobs. "It's my dad's funeral. Can't he get his own taxi?" Mrs. Vance tried to reason with him, but Sarah had already made up her mind. "I'll come back for you later," she said to Daniel, her tone final. Then she started the car and drove off, leaving him standing there. Left standing alone in the rain, Daniel wasn't surprised. He had seen this coming the moment Leo started talking. There was no trace of hurt on his face, just a quiet resignation as he waited for hours. But she never came back. The rain intensified, and he knew for certain she wasn't coming. The funeral home was in a remote location with no taxis nearby, and Daniel didn't have an umbrella. He had no choice but to start walking in the downpour. The rain blurred his vision as he trudged on for 2 hours, completely soaked, until he finally reached a main road where he could hail a cab home. That night, Daniel came down with a high fever. Sarah still hadn't come home. He was feverish and disoriented, feeling so weak he didn't even have the strength to call 911. He managed to drag himself out of bed, find some fever medicine, and choke it down with water. The medicine didn't work right away. He collapsed back into bed, his body burning, feeling miserable. After what felt like an eternity, he finally drifted into a restless sleep. A full day and night passed before the fever finally broke. It was then that he heard the front door open. Sarah walked in, not even glancing at him. She said nothing about abandoning him at the funeral home, instead silently packing a bag. Only when she was finished did she finally grant him a look. "Leo is not doing well. I'm going to stay with him for a few days. If you need anything while you're here alone, call me." Daniel watched her turn and leave without a moment's hesitation and let out a bitter, self-mocking laugh. Call her? What was the point? He was standing right in front of her, pale and obviously unwell, and she hadn't even noticed. How could he possibly expect her to leave Leo for him? True to her word, Sarah didn't come back for the next few days, and she didn't call either. But Daniel knew exactly what she was up to, thanks to Leo, who loved to post everything on his Instagram. Every day, Daniel saw updates. Sarah making him soup, Sarah peeling shrimp for him, Sarah taking him out to watch fireworks to cheer him up. Daniel tried not to pay too much attention to their activities. Once he had recovered his strength, he went to his office and handed in his resignation. "Daniel, why are you quitting all of a sudden? Did something happen?" his surprised colleagues asked. He just shook his head. "I've been away from home for too long. It's time for me to go back." This explanation only confused them more. Finally, one of them couldn't help but ask, "But what about Dr. Jenkins? Her family is here in Seattle. If you move back to your hometown, you'll be in a long-distance relationship." Daniel paused for a moment. See, even his colleagues knew how much he loved Sarah. He loved her enough to give up his life and move to a new city for her. So much so that everyone just assumed he would be the one to make all the sacrifices in the relationship. And she had taken his devotion for granted, saving all her patience and tenderness for someone else. He smiled and shook his head. "It's not long distance. We're not going to see each other again." After finishing his handover at work, he packed the last of his belongings and carried the boxes home. The moment he walked in the door, he saw Sarah and Leo sitting in the living room. "What's all this?" she asked, startled to see him carrying boxes. "The office is relocating, so I'm just bringing some stuff home for now," he said calmly. The lie came easily, with no trace of panic on his face. "Where are they moving?" Sarah asked with a frown. Before Daniel could answer, Leo cut in. "Daniel, I've been a mess since my dad died. I know I've been out of line, especially with that crazy idea about having a baby with Sarah. It was ridiculous looking back on it. Nothing happened between us, and now that my dad's gone, there's no reason for it anyway. I'm really sorry. Please, don't hold it against me." He put on such a pathetic act. If Daniel hadn't seen that provocative iMessage screenshot, he might have actually believed him. But he was in no mood to call Leo out on his games. He just gave a slight nod and carried his box into his room. He had just set the box down when he heard his phone ringing from the living room. He realized he'd left it out there. As he started for the door, it was flung open. Sarah stood there, her face dark, holding his phone in her hand and staring at him. "Who is wife in your contacts?" It was the first time Daniel had ever seen an expression like that on Sarah's face. In all their years together, she had always been the picture of calm and composure. He honestly didn't think she was capable of jealousy. He remembered back when he was first pursuing her, someone told him he needed a better strategy. Pestering her every day, they said, would just make her take his presence for granted until she got sick of him. So he tried playing hard to get, staying away for a few days, and even making a point of being seen with other girls, just to see if she would get jealous. But when she saw him with someone else, her expression remained perfectly placid. She walked right past him as if he wasn't there, not even sparing him a glance. That's when Daniel learned that playing hard to get might work on other people, but it was completely useless on Sarah. After that, they fell back into their old pattern, her walking ahead, him chasing from behind. In the blink of an eye, 6 years had passed. Now, he was finally seeing her jealous, but it was far too late. He took the phone from her, about to explain, when Leo's voice piped up from behind her. "It's probably just one of his buddies. We guys call each other wifey all the time." Since Leo had offered an explanation, Daniel didn't bother to correct him. He just took his phone, went back into his room, and redialed the number. He had assumed Chloe was calling about something important, but when she started talking, it was all small talk. "Have you eaten yet?" she asked. "It's been raining nonstop here in Austin. How's the weather in Seattle? Are you getting any rain? I heard a cold front is moving into Seattle. Make sure you bundle up so you don't get sick." At first, he answered her questions patiently, waiting for her to get to the point. But she just kept asking trivial questions, so finally, Daniel lost his patience. "What do you want, Chloe? If you're not going to tell me, I'm hanging up." That finally got her to stop beating around the bush. "I just wanted to ask if you regret it. If you're really serious about finding a new bride. You called and made all that small talk just to ask me that." Daniel didn't know whether to laugh or be annoyed. Chloe's response was a very serious Mitchum, her voice tinged with a subtle vulnerability. "It's just, didn't you really love your girlfriend?" He almost asked how she knew, but then he thought about it. From a moment he first saw Sarah in college, through his relentless pursuit, the joy of her finally saying yes, his daily acts of self-sacrificing devotion, and right up to his decision to get married and then call it off, his Facebook feed for years had been a running commentary on his life with Sarah. He had broadcast his love for her to the world, wanting everyone to know how much Daniel Miller loved Sarah Jenkins. It would have been impossible for anyone not to know. He shook his head with a self-deprecating smile. His long silence made Chloe anxious on the other end of the line, terrified he was about to say, "You're right, I do still love her." Forget I said anything about a new bride. But his answer came quickly. I don't love her anymore. He paused, then added to reassure her. Don't worry. I said I'm finding a new bride and that I'll marry you. I'm not going to change my mind because of her. After the call ended, Daniel finished packing his things and went back out to the living room. Leo was still there, talking with Sarah about something. When Sarah saw him, her expression was still sour. She hesitated for a moment before bringing up the contact name again. Done talking with your buddy? You really shouldn't use names like that for your friends. Daniel gave her a surprised look, not expecting her to still be hung up on that, and simply nodded. It was unclear if he was acknowledging her question or agreeing to her command, or both. Sarah took it as agreement, and her mood finally seemed to improve. Leo watched this entire exchange, taking in her every shift in emotion. A complex expression flickered across Leo's face. He hadn't expected Sarah to show any possessiveness over Daniel. In his mind, she was supposed to be completely indifferent to him. It's still early, Leo said. A superficial smile plastered on his face. Daniel, Sarah, let me take you both out to dinner and a movie. Think of it as a thank you for putting up with me lately. Daniel could easily guess Leo's real motive. He wanted to rub it in Daniel's face how kind, gentle, and attentive Sarah was to him. Daniel shook his head. For one, he was done playing their childish games. For another, his departure was imminent, and he had things to do. But of course, Leo wouldn't let the opportunity slip by. Seeing Daniel refuse, he immediately put on a hurt, pathetic expression and looked pleadingly at Sarah. Sarah, is Daniel still mad at me? I know I was being selfish and caused a lot of trouble. He has every right to be angry. It's all my fault. As he spoke, his eyes welled up with tears. Sarah's heart went out to him, and she shot Daniel a disapproving glare. Daniel sighed. It was clear that if he refused to go, Leo would have a complete meltdown, and he would be cast as the bad guy. In the end, he gave in and let them drag him out the door. It was dinner time, so they went to a restaurant first. Leo chose the place, a seafood restaurant. As they sat down in a private booth, Daniel gave Sarah a long, hard look. She shifted uncomfortably, avoiding his eyes, when she turned to watch Leo order. However, her expression softened with an indulgent fondness. Of course, Sarah felt guilty. She knew perfectly well that he was allergic to shellfish. Yet she had agreed to come here simply because Leo had said, I hear the seafood at this place is amazing. When the food arrived, Leo happily dug into the crab that Sarah had shelled for him, while Daniel sat with nothing but a glass of water. Leo looked up at him, confused. Daniel, this is really good. You're not going to have any? A sarcastic smile played on Daniel's lips. He was about to respond when Sarah quickly changed the subject, placing another plate of freshly peeled shrimp in front of Leo. Leo's eyes lit up, and he thanked her profusely, the previous conversation completely forgotten. After dinner, Leo insisted they all go to the movies. After some deliberation, he picked a horror film. It wasn't until they were seated in the dark theater that Daniel understood why. Daniel, sitting on the aisle seat, had to listen to Leo's constant shrieks. At one point, he accidentally grabbed Sarah's soda out of nervousness. The next, a jump scare sent him grabbing for her hand, whining about how scared he was. Finally, he abandoned his own seat and practically threw himself in her lap. Sarah was taken aback by his actions, instinctively frowning and raising a hand as if to push him away. But after a moment's hesitation, seeing the genuine panic on his face and thinking of his father, she let her hand fall. She glanced over and saw Daniel looking right at them. He had clearly seen the whole thing, yet his expression was completely unreadable. Daniel, she began, using a rare term of endearment. She was about to explain, but he had already turned back to the screen, seemingly engrossed in the film, completely unfazed. The words caught in her throat. Sarah felt a deep sense of unease, but another small yelp from Leo made her push the feeling down and focus on comforting him. Beside her, hearing her soft, comforting words, Daniel let out a quiet, humorless laugh. Knowing he wouldn't be coming back to Seattle once he left, Daniel decided he should say goodbye to his close friends. He sent a message to their group chat. Hey guys, let's get together soon. There's something I need to tell you. The first to reply was Sophia, the friend he was closest to. Perfect timing. There's a college reunion in a few days. Let's just meet up then. Works for me. Me too. Everyone agreed. On the day of the reunion, Daniel left his apartment early. When he got to the private room they'd booked, the others were already there. Daniel, you said you had something to tell us. What's up? One of them asked as he walked in. I'm moving back home in a couple of days to get married, he announced. I'm not sure when I'll be back in town, but you're all invited to the wedding. His words made them all remember his recent Facebook post. Wait, Daniel, you were serious about that? One of them exclaimed. You're really breaking up with Sarah and marrying someone else? Does she even know? Just as he finished speaking, the door to the room opened and Sarah walked in. Know what? She asked, seeing her sudden appearance. Everyone exchanged awkward glances until Sophia broke the silence with a nervous laugh and quickly changed the subject. Who let the brilliant Dr. Jenkins in? Have you drawn your card yet? Seeing Sarah's confused frown, Sophia laughed and explained, Fiona's been learning to read tarot cards. She's making everyone draw one so she can practice. Fiona, hearing her name, eagerly approached with a deck of cards. Come on, everyone gets one. Daniel casually drew a card. Seeing him participate, Sarah, who had been passively going along with things, agreed as well. Sophia, who had brought it up in the first place, egged her on. Come on, Fiona. Let's see what the cards say. Let's see how accurate you are. Daniel was a little curious himself. He flipped his card over. The words were clear. Expectation leads to emptiness. Seeking nothing leads to abundance. He stared at the phrase, a dazed look on his face. It wasn't wrong, he thought. He handed the card back to Fiona, who saw the inscription and patted his shoulder reassuringly. The first part sounds a little grim, but the second part promises a pleasant surprise, right? Don't take it too seriously. He nodded and watched as Sarah drew a card. When she turned it over, the words on it made him freeze. The few people who saw it also went quiet, making everyone else curious. Someone took the card, stared at it for a moment, then quickly handed it back to Fiona. Fiona, I think your cards are broken, the person said, trying to laugh it off. Everyone knows Daniel and Sarah are solid. There's no way she's going to lose her true love forever. The comment made Daniel's closest friends exchange awkward glances. How could it not be possible? Daniel was literally planning to leave the city, leave Sarah, and marry someone else. But most of the people there didn't know the real story, so they just laughed it off, teasing Fiona about her inaccurate cards, and the moment passed. Just then, a phone rang, barely audible over the noise of the party, but Sarah heard it and answered immediately. Whatever was said on the other end made her expression change. She turned to Daniel. Daniel, you need to come with me to the hospital. Now, Daniel didn't understand why she needed him at the hospital, but seeing the serious look on her face, he didn't ask questions. He just followed her out of the room. She drove, frantically, speeding toward the hospital, laying on the horn in traffic, her anxiety palpable. She turned a 30-minute drive into 15. When they got to the hospital, she led him wordlessly up to the roof. The moment they stepped out, they saw a large man with a knife holding a terrified, tear-streaked Leo hostage against the ledge. When Leo saw Sarah, a flicker of hope ignited in his eyes. Sarah, help me. Before Daniel could process what was happening, he felt a hard shove from behind. Sarah's voice, cold and clear, rang out. Look carefully. This is my boyfriend. Let the man you're holding go, she said to the attacker. He's innocent. He means nothing to me. So killing him won't do you any good. Only by taking my boyfriend hostage will you get what you want. Hearing Sarah's words, it all clicked for Daniel. She had dragged him here to trade him for Leo's safety. Listening to the murmurs of the onlookers, he quickly pieced together the rest of the story. It was a disgruntled patient's family member. They must have been stalking Sarah for days, and seeing her constantly with Leo, they assumed he was her boyfriend and took him hostage. A chilling cold washed over Daniel, as if he'd been doused in ice water. Behind him, Sarah continued to push him forward. How laughable. His girlfriend spends all her time with another man, and the moment danger appears, she shoves him forward to be a human shield for him and her son. The attacker looked from Leo to Daniel. He must have seen Daniel before while stalking them, because although he still looked suspicious, his grip on the knife loosened slightly. He scanned his surroundings, preparing to make the exchange. But the instant his grip slackened, police officers swarmed in from all directions. In a flash, one officer kicked the knife from his hand, while another pulled Leo to safety. The second Leo was clear. Sarah rushed to his side. Leo, are you okay? Shaking with fear, Leo clung to her, sobbing. Sarah, I was so scared. Only after she was certain Leo was unharmed did Sarah seem to remember Daniel. She turned to him, an afterthought. Are you okay? But when he met her gaze, his eyes were completely dead and empty. Sarah wasn't one for explanations. Most of the time, she was indifferent to everything. But seeing the look on his face now, she felt a tremor of something unfamiliar, an emotion she couldn't control. Daniel, the police were already in position. The plan was for you to create a distraction so they could move in. It was just a tactic. Her logic was sound, and Daniel didn't argue. Yes, it was just a tactic, and yes, he was fine. But what if it had gone wrong? How could she, his fiancée, so casually risk his life to save someone else's? In that moment, he looked at her as if she were a complete stranger. This, he thought, is the woman you gave up everything for, the woman you moved to a new city for. Do you regret it? Yes, he thought. He regretted it all. But thankfully, it wasn't too late to change course. In the days that followed, Sarah said Leo was traumatized by the kidnapping and that she couldn't leave his side. She seemed to have completely forgotten that she was the one who had pushed Daniel toward the man with a knife. Fortunately, Daniel had already decided to let go of this hopeless relationship. He wouldn't let her hurt him anymore. Left alone in the apartment once again, he began to methodically remove every trace of Sarah from space. He picked up their wedding photos from the studio, took them out of the frames, and tossed them into the fireplace one by one. Only after watching the flames consume the last of their smiling faces did he turn his attention to the rest of the apartment. In his effort to feel closer to her, he had filled their home with matching couples' items. His and hers toothbrush holders on the bathroom counter, towels with matching embroidered patterns, couples' outfits hanging in the closet, and matching bracelets in the jewelry box. Daniel gathered every last one of these items, packed them into cardboard boxes, and threw them all away. He wouldn't be needing them anymore. After getting rid of everything, Daniel began to pack his own bags. He had once poured his heart into making this apartment a home, filling every corner with his presence. He had hoped that by surrounding her with these things, she would think of him, and that over time, she would grow to truly accept him, love him, and need him. But that had never happened. He had a lot of stuff, so the packing was slow. He was still at it when Sarah came home that evening. She pushed open the bedroom door and saw clothes spread all over the bed. Her sudden entrance startled him. As he was trying to think of an explanation for the mess, she asked, "What's all this? Are you going on a business trip?" Daniel paused for a second, then turned his back to her and continued packing. Out of her sight, a sarcastic smile touched his lips. A business trip? He had already quit his job. It seemed the possibility of him actually leaving her had never even crossed her mind. That was fine. He didn't want to get into it with her anyway. So he just mumbled an affirmative. "When do you leave?" she asked casually, not giving it much thought. Daniel considered for a moment, then decided to tell her the truth on this one point. "Tomorrow morning." Sarah said nothing more and left the bedroom to start making dinner. She was a good cook, but was usually too busy with work, so it was a rare treat for Daniel to eat a meal she'd prepared. Lately, she'd been cooking a lot, but every single one of those meals had been for Leo. After they finished eating, Sarah produced a small gift box and handed it to Daniel. He looked at it, surprised. She was rarely the one to initiate gestures like this. Instead of taking it, he just asked, "What's this for?" "I'm sorry. About what happened at the hospital," Sarah said after a moment's hesitation, remembering the look on his face that day. Daniel finally understood the reason for her strange behavior, but he had already decided to let her go. If she wanted to protect Leo, that was her business, not his. His flat reaction seemed to surprise her, but she quickly moved on to what she really wanted to say. "Leo's been having a really hard time lately. I've taken a few days off work to be with him." She watched him for a reaction, but his expression remained neutral, a stark contrast to the anger he used to show whenever she mentioned Leo. Daniel felt nothing. What was there left to react to? In the past, he could be sick, injured, it could be his birthday or their anniversary, and she would never take time off work for him. But now, Leo was simply in a bad mood, and she was taking a leave of absence to be with him. There was nothing left to say. "Do whatever you want," he said flatly. Hearing his dismissive tone, Sarah did something rare. She stood up and hugged him. "Daniel, Leo is my mentor's son. He's been a wreck since his father died. And now, this kidnapping. Just let me help him through this, and I promise I'll make it up to you later, okay?" Daniel didn't agree, but he didn't refuse either. What future was there to talk about? The next morning, Sarah saw his packed suitcase by the door and came back with breakfast. "I'll drive you to the airport," she offered. He didn't say anything, just sat down and quietly ate. As he was finishing up and getting ready to leave, she glanced at her phone. Then came the words Daniel had been expecting all along. "Daniel, something's come up. I can't take you after all." He didn't need to guess who it was. It was Leo, of course. He just nodded. "Go on, do what you need to do." With his permission, Sarah left without another thought. Just before she walked out, she glanced back. Let me know when you're coming back, and I'll pick you up." Then she was gone. Daniel watched her retreating figure until it disappeared and whispered to the empty space, "Sarah, I'm not coming back." He took one last look around the apartment he had called home for 6 years. He remembered the excitement of first moving in, the loneliness of being left there by himself so many times, and finally, the profound relief of his decision to leave. He left a short note on the table. "Sarah, we're over. I'm going home to get married." With that, he grabbed his suitcase, which was already waiting by the door, and took a taxi to the airport. From this moment on, Daniel Miller would no longer be a part of Sarah Jenkins's life. After a few hours in the air, the plane finally landed in Austin. Daniel pushed his luggage cart with one hand while checking a recent iMessage on his phone with the other. "Just landed. Are you here yet?" he typed. "Just got here," came the immediate reply. He hit send and looked up, immediately spotting Chloe Davis waiting in the arrivals hall. She was wearing a stylish dress and bold red lipstick, exuding an air of sophisticated grace. She kept glancing between her phone and the crowd, scanning the faces of the passengers. The moment she saw Daniel, she waved and started walking toward him. He was stunned. He couldn't believe that the goofy, argumentative girl he grew up with had transformed into this elegant woman. "What? Cat got your tongue?" the stunning woman asked, stopping in front of him with a playful smirk. "Don't worry. Once we're married, you can stare all you want." Realizing he'd been staring, Daniel's ears turned red. He tried to play it cool, rolling his eyes at her. "Long time no see, Chloe. You're as conceited as ever." She casually linked her arm through his and started leading him toward the exit. "Hey, if you've got it, flaunt it." Daniel was speechless. Looking at her radiant face, he couldn't argue. She really was beautiful. She had always been a big deal on campus, smart and gorgeous, with a cool, confident vibe that all the guys loved. She seemed like she'd be an expert at dating, but she was surprisingly innocent. Whenever a guy asked her out, she'd give them a stern lecture. "We're students. Our priority should be studying, not all this other nonsense." After high school, they went their separate ways. He hadn't really kept up with her, but he'd heard through the grapevine that she had never dated anyone. Thinking about this, he suddenly looked at her. "Back then, everyone thought my Facebook post was a joke. Why did you take it seriously?" He asked the question just as they reached her car in the parking garage. Chloe opened the passenger door for him, waited for him to get in, then walked around to the driver's side. She got in, looked at him, and raised an eyebrow. "I thought you would have figured it out by now." "Figure what out?" Daniel asked, completely lost. Seeing his clueless expression, Chloe sighed softly and looked away, not answering his question directly. The car pulled out of the parking garage. Just when Daniel thought she wasn't going to answer, she spoke up, her voice laced with its usual teasing tone. "It's not the first time you've done something completely crazy for a girl. Of course I believed you." She paused as the light ahead turned red, and the car slowed to a stop. She turned to look at him, a smile in her eyes. "Besides, what if it was real? I couldn't pass up the chance to hit the jackpot." Her first comment made him pause. Not the first time? His mind raced, and as he met her gaze, it clicked. She was talking about him moving to Seattle for Sarah. Her next words only confirmed his suspicion. It finally dawned on Daniel, and a blush crept up his ears. You don't have a crush on me, do you?" he asked, feeling awkward. The light turned green, and as the car started moving, her soft laughter filled the space between them. "Yes, Daniel, I do. For a very, very long time. Longer than you've loved Sarah. Back then, I was young and stupid, and I thought being your rival was the best way to get you to notice me. I never realized you were so dense you'd run off to a city halfway across the country for a woman who didn't appreciate you. But that's okay. I was patient enough to wait for you to come back." Chloe kept that last part to herself, but her simple confession was enough to leave him stunned. He didn't snap out of it until she pulled into a parking spot at his family's apartment complex. "Since when?" he finally managed to ask. This time, she was evasive. "Guess." That familiar, frustrating feeling washed over him. He got out of the car without another word, and Chloe got out and fell in a step beside him. The Miller and Davis families were neighbors, so they walked the same way. They rode the elevator in silence. Daniel stared straight ahead, trying to act nonchalant, while Chloe leaned casually against the wall, watching his ears turn progressively redder. The elevator dinged, and the doors opened. Chloe walked him to his front door, then stopped him from coming any closer. She knew that even guys could get shy. A small smile played on her lips as she reached out and ruffled his hair. Then, before he could get annoyed, she started to back away, calling over her shoulder, "I'll bring my parents over in a couple of days to discuss the wedding plans." "You'd better be ready, Danny boy." The ridiculous nickname made the blush return to his ears. He shot her an annoyed look, unlocked his door, and went inside without another word. Chloe didn't mind at all, practically skipping to the stairwell. She only lived one floor up, but right now, she was so happy she felt like she could climb 20. Daniel dragged his suitcase inside. After 6 years away, he felt a strange sense of nervous apprehension. The living room was empty, and the sound of the suitcase wheels rolling across the floor seemed deafeningly loud in the silence. Hearing the noise, Grandpa Miller, his hair now white, thought there was a burglar. He rushed out of his room, brandishing his cane, his voice booming. "Who's there? Who dares break into the Miller house?" "Daniel." He trailed off as he saw Daniel standing in the living room, his eyes filled with tears. The cane clattered to the floor, forgotten. Grandpa Miller's own eyes instantly reddened, but he abruptly turned and started walking back to his room. Daniel dropped his suitcase and hurried after him, catching him just as he reached his bed and wrapping him in a hug. "Grandpa, I missed you so much." But his grandfather didn't believe him. The boy had said he was just going away for college and would be back for the holidays. But his grandfather had waited and waited, and 6 years had passed. He knew Daniel was coming home soon, just not the exact day. So his initial reaction was one of surprise. But it was Chloe who had told him Daniel was coming home. The boy himself hadn't bothered to call once. He'd probably forgotten all about his old grandfather, and now he had the nerve to say he missed him. With that thought, Grandpa Miller grunted and tried to push Daniel's arms away, but Daniel held on tight, his tears falling onto his grandfather's shoulder. Feeling the dampness on his shoulder, the old man sighed and stopped struggling, though his words were still sharp. "You miss me? You haven't been home in 6 years. You just left this old man here, all alone. If it wasn't for that sweet Chloe Davis checking in on me, you probably wouldn't even know if I was dead or alive." His voice was thick with resentment. Daniel quickly covered his grandfather's mouth, his own eyes filled with disapproval. "Don't say things like that, Grandpa. You're going to live to be 100. But remembering what his grandfather had said, Daniel was flooded with guilt. "I'm sorry, Grandpa. It's my fault. I'm not leaving again. I'll stay here with you, okay?" Grandpa Miller immediately shook his head. "Don't be ridiculous. I'm still waiting to see you get married and have children. I can't rest in peace and face your grandmother and your parents until I've seen you happy." "Grandpa, stop talking like that." Hearing him speak so morbidly made Daniel's heart ache. He knew his grandfather wouldn't be around forever, but he wanted that day to be as far in the future as possible. After they talked for a while, the heavy atmosphere lifted. Grandpa Miller looked at his grandson, his expression softening. "You've grown up. You're thinner. You've changed. No matter how much I change, I'll always be your grandson," Daniel said, leaning his head on his grandfather's shoulder, finally feeling at peace. Grandpa Miller chuckled, but then his expression grew worried again. "But you said you were getting married. Why did you suddenly come back?" Daniel shook his head, not wanting to get into the details. "It didn't work out. We called off." Seeing the worry return to his grandfather's face, he remembered what Chloe had said. His ears grew warm as he hesitated, then told him the truth. Chloe said she's bringing her parents over in a couple of days to discuss wedding plans. At his last words, Grandpa Miller's eyes went wide. It took him a moment to process what he'd heard, and then he burst out laughing. "Well, I'll be. That girl waited all these years, and she finally got her man." Meanwhile, back in Seattle, it was 3 nights later when Sarah finally returned to the apartment. She pushed open the door to find it dark and silent. She called out Daniel's name instinctively, but the only response was silence. She flipped on the lights. The apartment was empty, just as she'd left it. Then she remembered. He was on a business trip. It occurred to her that he hadn't contacted her at all in the past few days. He was supposed to let her know his return date so she could pick him up, but he never had. Sarah walked into the living room, pulling out her phone and opening her iMessage history with Daniel. She scrolled through the endless stream of messages he used to send her. Funny stories from his day at work, pictures of his life, tentative requests for her time, and occasional complaints about a bad day. Her replies were always brief, usually just "K got it" or "fine." Sometimes she wouldn't reply at all, but he had been relentless, messaging her every single day. Looking closer, she realized his last message had been sent over 2 weeks ago. He hadn't contacted her in that long. A strange, uncomfortable feeling stirred within her. For the first time in a long time, she deigned to message him first. "Is your work trip over? When are you coming back?" She sent the message, but there was no immediate reply. Anxious, she checked the time. It was already 11 at night. Sarah relaxed a little. He probably just hadn't seen it yet because it was so late. With that thought, she set her phone down, but out of the corner of her eye, she spotted a piece of paper on the table. Curious, she picked it up. The note was short, but every word struck her like a physical blow. Sarah, we're over. I'm going home to get married. She read the note over and over, as if the words wouldn't sink in, half expecting to find another line that said, "Just kidding. Got you." If that were the case, she would have scolded him severely. How could he joke about something as serious as breaking up? But no matter how many times she read it, the words didn't change. He was serious. Sarah's eyes instantly filled with tears. With a trembling hand, she picked up her phone, took a photo of the note, and sent it to Daniel. She was about to type a message demanding to know what this meant when she saw a red exclamation point appear next to the photo she'd just sent. Below it, a line of text read, "Message failed to send." Sarah's mind went completely blank. It took her a moment to realize what it meant. Daniel had blocked her. Her head was spinning, but her fingers were already dialing his number. It rang a few times, then went straight to a recorded message. "The number you have dialed is not available." Sarah froze. Had he just sent her straight to voicemail? A wave of anger washed over her. She tried calling again, but this time it didn't even ring. He had blocked her number. Sarah couldn't understand it, so she'd been a little more attentive to Leo lately. Did he have to be so dramatic about it? She had already explained the situation. Leo was her mentor's son, and he was grieving. What was there to be so angry about? Besides, hadn't he agreed to let her go stay with Leo? Why was he throwing a tantrum now? Even then, Sarah was convinced Daniel was just sulking. After all, he loved her. He had moved to a new city for her. He wouldn't just give up and leave to marry someone else. It was impossible. What Sarah failed to understand was that Daniel's departure wasn't sudden at all. She was just now, finally, noticing it. Unable to reach him, she posted a message in their old college friends group chat. But it was late, and no one responded. She slumped back into the bedroom. As she went to the bathroom to wash her face, she noticed that all their matching sets of toiletries were gone. Only hers remained. She opened the closet and saw that the matching outfits he had bought her, the ones she'd never worn, had also vanished. She lay in bed, staring blankly at the ceiling, her thoughts a tangled mess. How could this be happening? How could Daniel just leave? He must be angry. That was it. Tomorrow, she would find a way to contact him, apologize, say all the right things, and he would come back. He had to. Sarah wasn't sure, but right now, all she could do was wait. She lay awake all night, tossing and turning, constantly checking her phone for a reply. At noon the next day, she finally got a reply. It was from Sophia, one of Daniel's friends. Sarah excitedly opened the message. It was a photo. The moment she saw it, she felt like she'd been struck by lightning. It was a wedding photo. In it, Daniel, dressed in a sharp white suit, was smiling down at his bride. The bride was nestled against him, her arms around his waist, gazing up at him with eyes full of pure adoration. And the woman was not Sarah. She stared at the photo, her mind completely blank, feeling utterly disoriented. Another message notification chimed. It was from Sophia. Looking for Daniel? He moved back to his hometown a while ago to get married. The wedding is next week, I hear. Don't they make a perfect couple? The wedding is next week? The news hit Sarah like a series of punches. No, she refused to believe it. He couldn't just marry someone else. He had only just left. How could he possibly have arranged a wedding so quickly? It had to be fake. He was just trying to make her angry, waiting for her to come crawling back. The thought gave her a renewed sense of purpose. She hesitated for a moment, then sent another message to Sophia. Do you know where he is now? Sarah's first instinct was to go find him immediately. It had been 4 days. He must be desperate for her to come find him. But as she went to book a flight, a horrifying realization struck her. She couldn't remember the name of his hometown. On the other end, Sophia saw the message and let out a laugh of pure disbelief and anger. Now she finally understood why Daniel had walked away after all these years, right when they were supposed to get married. They had been together for 6 years. Daniel had given up his entire life to be with her in Seattle, and she didn't even know where he was from. Sophia had also heard about the incident at the hospital, how Sarah had used him as a bargaining chip to save another man. It didn't matter if the police were there. The fact remained, for Sarah, Daniel had never been the priority. Sophia scoffed. Her reply was blunt. Why are you asking? Planning on crashing the wedding? Give me a break, Sarah. You didn't appreciate him when you had him. So now, please do him a favor and stay as far away as possible. Sarah frowned, closing the chat when it was clear she wouldn't get any more information. 3 days before the wedding, Daniel received a call from an unknown number. Since he had already blocked Sarah's number, he answered it without a second thought. He regretted it instantly. "Daniel, I've been trying to reach you for so long. You finally answered." The moment he heard Sarah's voice, Daniel moved to hang up, but she spoke quickly, as if anticipating his move. "Daniel, wait, don't hang up. I know you're angry with me. Just tell me where you are. I'll come to you, okay?" She tried to make her voice as gentle as possible, to convince him she was genuinely sorry. Her plea was interrupted by another voice in the background on his end, a voice tinged with playful complaint. "Honey, who is that? You're taking forever." The word honey struck Sarah like a bolt of lightning. Even more shocking was Daniel's response. He didn't correct her. He just said it's no one. Not important. For the first time, Sarah understood that words could be lethal. Not important. Those two simple words caused a roaring in her ears, and she couldn't hear anything else. She didn't even register when he hung up the phone. She suddenly remembered seeing his phone in the living room, the call coming in from a contact named Wife. How had she dismissed it? Oh, right. Leo had told her it was a common joke among guys. But now, it all made perfect, sickening sense. It wasn't a friend. It was the woman whose voice she had just heard. Rage clouded her thoughts, but she was powerless. She knew without trying that he had blocked this new number too. But she hadn't agreed to break up. How could he just move on to someone else? Why did he get to decide when their relationship started and when it ended? Her eyes darkened with resolve. She wasn't going to give up this easily. Sarah managed to get Daniel's home address from their old class president in college. She was just about to leave when her phone rang. The screen displayed Leo's name. She hesitated for a moment, but ultimately turned and headed toward Leo's place. "It's fine," she told herself. "I'll deal with this quickly, and then I'll go find Daniel. I won't let him marry someone else." But Sarah never imagined that this one detour would cost her 3 days. By the time she had finished dealing with Leo's latest crisis, it was the day of Daniel's wedding. The 3 days flew by. Daniel and Chloe's wedding was held at a hotel near their family's homes. Despite the short notice, nothing was overlooked. Wedding photos, the reception, the dress, the rings, the new apartment, everything was perfectly in place. Daniel hardly had to lift a finger. On the day of the wedding, he and Chloe went to the hotel early to get ready. Chloe left the greeting of guests to her parents, choosing instead to stay by Daniel's side every moment. Sitting in front of the makeup mirror, Daniel noticed Chloe staring at him intently. "Chloe," he said, a suspicion dawning on him. "All of this is so perfectly planned. You didn't start preparing all this after I came back, did you?" She cleared her throat and looked away. Of course she hadn't. She had been planning this for a long time. The apartment, the dress, the rings, they had all been ready for years. If he had married someone else, they would have remained hidden forever. But if he chose her, she was ready to give him everything. Everything else, the venue and the reception, she had started planning the day he made that Facebook post. Chloe didn't say a word, but the way she looked away told him everything. It only made him more curious. She had admitted she loved him, but she was still secretive about when it had all started. He felt like there was a piece of the puzzle he was still missing. Chloe turned back and saw the thoughtful look on his face, knowing he was lost in thought again. Just then, the makeup artist finished up. "All done," she said, packing her kit. "Mr. Miller, you have fantastic skin. You barely needed anything. Easiest groom I've had in a decade." Chloe walked over and gave him a quick, soft kiss on the lips, which was enough to make Daniel blush furiously. "Of course he does," she said proudly. "He's my husband, after all." The next second, he playfully swatted the back of her head. "Chloe, hey, are you trying to murder your new wife on our wedding day?" she yelped, clutching her head dramatically. For a second, Daniel was actually worried he'd hit her too hard. But as he reached out to check on her, she wrapped her arms around him. "Honey, why do you still call me by my full name?" Her mock pout was so over the top that he couldn't help but roll his eyes. The makeup artist laughed at their antics, and after a quick reminder not to smudge their makeup, she left the room to give the newlyweds some privacy. They joked around for a few more minutes until it was almost time for the ceremony. Chloe headed out of the dressing room first. Just then, Daniel's phone, sitting on a nearby table, started to ring. When he saw the unknown number flashing on the screen, his first thought was Sarah, and he instinctively declined the call. A few moments later, the same number called back. He hesitated. Not every unknown number was her, and it was ridiculous to avoid all of them just because of Sarah. He answered. A woman's unfamiliar voice came through the line. "Hello, am I speaking with Mr. Daniel Miller?" Daniel confirmed it was him and waited for her to explain. "This is the emergency room at Austin General Hospital. the woman said. Your girlfriend, a Ms. Jenkins, was in a car accident. She was speeding. Her condition is critical. Can you come to the hospital? He froze, the words taking a moment to register. Sarah was in Austin, and she'd been in a car accident? Hello, Mr. Miller. Are you still there? The nurse's voice asked, pulling Daniel back to reality. He took a breath and then spoke, his voice firm. I'm sorry, but we've broken up. In fact, today is my wedding day. I can't come. You'll have to try and contact someone else. With that, he hung up. Daniel had a sinking feeling he knew why Sarah was in Austin, but as he'd said, they were over. Her life was no longer his concern. She had plenty of other people to call. The nurse on the other end listened to the dial tone, an awkward expression on her face. Just then, a doctor came by, asking if she'd reached the family yet. The nurse just shook her head and started dialing another number. Who would have guessed? The number listed in the patient's phone as boyfriend belonged to a man who had not only broken up with her, but was, at that very moment, getting married to someone else. It took another hour to finally reach Sarah's parents. They were told their daughter's legs had been crushed in the accident, causing severe nerve damage and gangrene that would require amputation. Her right hand had also sustained deep cuts, severing tendons. While doctors had stabilized her, she would likely never be able to lift heavy things or perform delicate tasks again. The news devastated them, and they immediately booked the first flight to Austin. With the family's consent secured, the doctors began to prep for surgery. Meanwhile, at the wedding reception, the hall was filled with guests. Chloe, in her beautiful wedding gown, walked down the aisle toward Daniel, who was waiting for her on the stage. Though he had always hoped to see his grandson find someone to spend his life with, now that the day was here, Grandpa Miller couldn't help but tear up. Grandpa, why are you crying? Daniel whispered. This is a happy day. Despite his words, seeing his grandfather's teary eyes made Daniel's own eyes well up. He fought back the emotion and forced a smile. Besides, our new apartment isn't far from here. We'll be able to visit all the time. Grandpa Miller saw the tears in his grandson's eyes and patted his hand. Okay, no crying. Not today. The long aisle suddenly felt very short. As he placed Chloe's hand in Daniel's, he spoke with heartfelt emotion. Daniel, you take good care of Chloe. Love each other and be there for each other for the rest of your lives. He had promised not to cry, but by the end, his voice was thick with emotion. Time waits for no one. In the blink of an eye, he had become an old man, and the little boy who used to sit on his knee was now a grown man, taking a wife. Chloe nodded solemnly, her usual playful demeanor gone. She squeezed Daniel's hand and looked at his grandfather, her eyes full of sincerity. Don't worry, Grandpa. I'll take good care of Daniel. I won't let you down, and I won't let him down. Vows were exchanged, rings were placed on fingers, and a kiss sealed their union. Amidst the cheers and blessings of their friends and family, Daniel and Chloe became husband and wife. Daniel, she whispered against his lips, I finally married you. Leo arrived at the Austin hospital with Sarah's parents that afternoon. Seeing her daughter lying unconscious in the hospital bed, Mrs. Jenkins was overcome with grief. Her daughter was so brilliant, a successful surgeon at such a young age. How were they going to tell her when she woke up that she would never operate again? But no matter how painful, the truth had to be faced. Sarah finally woke up a week later. She opened her eyes and saw her parents, and she saw Leo. But the one person she most wanted to see was not there. Dad, Mom, she rasped, her breathing still shallow. Have you seen Daniel? Did he come to see me? Hearing her question, her parents exchanged a look of displeasure, biting their tongues to keep from saying what they were thinking. But Leo, his eyes brimming with tears, immediately pulled out his phone and showed her Daniel's Facebook page from the past week. You're in this state because of him, and you're still asking about him? He cried, his voice filled with indignation. He's been busy getting married and going on his honeymoon. He's having the time of his life. Do you really think he cares enough to visit you? He had never wanted Sarah and Daniel to get back together, and now he saw his chance to drive a permanent wedge between them. He wanted her to feel the full force of Daniel's abandonment, completely forgetting that she had just woken from a coma and was in a fragile state. Before her parents could stop him, Sarah had already seen the post from the day of her accident, a photo of a marriage certificate, bright red, with the names Daniel Miller and Chloe Davis written on it. She stared at the screen, her eyes burning, her mind refusing to accept what she was seeing. How could this be happening? He had really married someone else. He had thrown away their 6 years together so easily. What had it all meant? She couldn't understand it, couldn't believe it. She tried to push herself up intending to go find him, but the movement made her freeze. She looked down at the angry, jagged scar on her right wrist, and her heart plummeted. Her eyes were wild as she registered the unnatural stiffness in her right hand and the complete lack of sensation in her legs as she tried to move. With a trembling hand, she reached for the blanket covering her, but her parents quickly held her down, their faces etched with sorrow, shaking their heads. She didn't need them to say a word. She knew. She was a doctor. She hadn't lost consciousness immediately after the crash. She had seen the extent of her injuries. Her mind, just now waking, had simply been protecting her from the horrifying truth. Her voice choked with a sob. She ignored Leo, who had been pushed aside, and looked only at her parents, desperately hoping for an answer that contradicted her own medical knowledge. "Dad, my legs, my hand, they're okay, right?" But their silence, the way they held the blanket down, the tears streaming down her mother's face, was all the answer she needed. The standoff was broken by Leo, who, finally sensing the gravity of the situation, quietly put his phone away and tried to offer comfort. "It's okay, Sarah," he said softly. "You'll get better. I'll be right here with you." His words were the spark that ignited the inferno of her rage. All the grief and anger she felt coalesced and directed itself at him. She shoved him away with surprising force, sending him stumbling backward. "Ah!" Leo cried out as the back of his head hit a nearby chair, and he crumpled to the floor. But this time, his pain elicited no sympathy from her. "If it wasn't for you, Daniel would never have left me," she screamed. "If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be like this. Get out. Get out now." Her words cut him to the core, and his face went pale, but he stubbornly refused to leave. Her parents, however, seized on her accusation, their expressions suddenly sharp. "What do you mean by that, Sarah?" "Caught." Sarah froze. After a long, defeated silence, she lay back and told them everything that had happened over the past few months. As they listened to the story of the IVF plan, their expressions shifted from confusion to shock to profound disappointment. "Sarah, you've never given us a moment's worry your entire life," her father said, shaking his head. "How could you do something so incredibly foolish?" Sarah didn't answer, just covered her face with her hands as muffled, heartbroken sobs escaped her. She didn't know why she'd done it. She had assumed his love was unconditional, that he would never leave her. Seeing her daughter's pain, Mrs. Jenkins's heart ached, and her sympathy shifted to anger at Daniel. "Even if you made a mistake, you were on your way to see him when this happened. For him to be so heartless." Sarah wanted to defend him, but the words caught in her throat. A part of her couldn't help but agree. She was like this, and he couldn't even be bothered to visit? At that moment, Leo took out a ring, preparing to make his move. "Sarah, marry me," he said, his voice earnest. "I'll take care of you for the rest of our lives." His proposal stunned everyone in the room. Sarah's mind went blank, and she answered on pure instinct. "I could never marry you." Seeing her refusal, Leo turned his pleading eyes to her parents. "Dad, Mom, I'm not going to marry him," Sarah stated firmly. Sarah lay in bed with her eyes squeezed shut, ignoring her parents' attempts to persuade her. "Why are you being so stubborn?" her mother finally said in exasperation. "Leo loves you, and in your condition, you need someone to take care of you. Are you still holding out hope for Daniel? He's married to someone else. Sarah, what are you waiting for?" It wasn't that she didn't understand her logic. She just wasn't ready to accept it. Sarah had always thought her feelings for Daniel were just a comfortable habit. It was only when he was gone, married to another woman, that her broken heart screamed the truth at her. It wasn't habit, it was love. And she couldn't live without him. But as her father said, Daniel was married. Waiting for him was pointless. She clenched her fists, but the word yes wouldn't come. How could she accept this fate? She had been so close to marrying Daniel. How had everything gone so horribly wrong? Daniel, oblivious to Sarah's turmoil, returned to Austin with Chloe after their honeymoon. It was early September, and the city was bustling with students returning for the fall semester. On the first day of classes, Chloe stood by the front door while Daniel fastened the buttons on her blouse. She looked up at him, then patted his chest approvingly. "There, I still don't know why you insisted on dressing up so much. You look great in casual clothes." Chloe just shook her head and pointed her cheek. Daniel rolled his eyes, but leaned in and gave her a kiss. She beamed. "How else am I supposed to show off to my colleagues and students what a handsome, talented husband I have?" Daniel opened his mouth to retort, then thought better of it. He just playfully pushed her out the door. "Just go. I have no idea why the University of Texas hired you as a professor, but you'd better not be late. They should feel lucky to have me, Chloe said with a proud flick of her eyebrow. I was a top graduate and an award-winning lecturer. All right, I get it, you're brilliant, Daniel laughed. Now get going, professor. It would be a bad look if you were late on the first day. Pushed out the door, Chloe just grinned and headed off to work, completely content. A rumor was going around the UT Austin campus. The notoriously tough Professor Davis had gotten married, and it had completely changed her. She was smiling all the time now. Daniel only found out later, when he visited her on campus, that she had been showing off her wedding ring every single day. Her new favorite lines were, "Oh, this dress? My husband picked it out. This lunch? It's delicious, isn't it? My husband is an amazing cook. Plans for the weekend? A date night with my husband, of course." Daniel, still blissfully unaware of his wife's campus antics, was at home contemplating his next career move when there was a knock at the door. He opened it to find a delivery driver with a package for him. He signed for it, took it inside, and opened it. Inside was a single, elegant invitation. He unfolded it, and the first thing he saw were the two names printed at the top, Sarah Jenkins and Leo Vance. So, they had ended up together after all. He couldn't imagine why they would send him an invitation. Was it to show off? To prove that she could find someone else even after he left? What did it matter to him? He couldn't care less who she married. He tossed the invitation onto a side table and forgot about it, getting back to his day. When Chloe came home that afternoon, she noticed it on the floor where it had fallen and picked it up. "What's this? Your first love?" she asked, flipping it open and raising an eyebrow at the names. "Took them long enough." Daniel just shrugged, taking it from her hand to throw it in the trash. "Don't worry about it. It's just weird." But she snatched it back, holding it out of his reach with a wicked grin. "Oh no," she said, her voice full of mischief. "They were kind enough to invite us. The least we can do is go and see the show." She was dying to know what Sarah was thinking, sending them an invitation now. The wedding was a month away, giving them more time to plan than Daniel and Chloe had, but the result was still somehow lacking. Daniel never thought he'd be back in Seattle so soon, let alone with Chloe on his arm. Many of the guests knew Daniel and were aware of his history with Sarah. Seeing him walk in with another woman sparked a wave of hushed whispers. "I can't believe it," one guest murmured, watching Daniel and Chloe find table. "Just a few months ago, we all thought he and Sarah were a sure thing, and now they're both married to other people." The person next to him chuckled. "Well, you can't say they didn't get married." The first person rolled their eyes, but then a smile broke through. "When I first heard Daniel was getting married, I assumed he was the one who'd had a change of heart. But looking at this, I think maybe his heart was just broken." A third person leaned in, immediately grabbing their attention. "What makes you say that? I heard this wedding was so rushed because Sarah's pregnant. Already 2 months along." "What, 2 months? If you do the math, that's right around the time she and Daniel broke up." "Who knows? But wasn't that when Daniel made that Facebook post about needing a new bride? This is probably why." The voices were low, but Daniel was close enough to catch the word pregnant. He allowed a short, sharp laugh. So that was it. No wonder she had the audacity to send him an invitation. 3 months. It must have happened back when they were talking about IVF, when she lied and said they'd stopped the process after her mentor died. Chloe squeezed his hand, and Daniel turned to see a look of concern on her face. He smiled and shook his head to reassure her, then beckoned for her to lean in. She was confused but did as he asked. The moment she leaned closer, she felt his lips brush her cheek in a quick, soft kiss. Her eyes widened in surprise, and when she looked at him, he had already turned away, but the bright red tips of his ears betrayed his calm facade. From a distance, Sarah watched the entire exchange, a complex mix of emotions churning inside her. Seeing them together, she could no longer comfort herself with the lie that he had only married Chloe to make her jealous. He seemed to genuinely love her. He didn't just tolerate this new woman's presence. He actively sought her affection. It was nothing like their relationship, where she had stood still while he did all the chasing. This was a partnership. He was truly moving on to a future without her, while she was still trapped in their past. Leo came up behind her, following her gaze to where Daniel and Chloe were sitting. They were whispering to each other, heads close together, radiating a warmth and affection that was a world away from the strained pretense between him and Sarah. Leo fought to suppress the jealousy and bitterness rising in his chest, forcing a smile. "Sarah, it's almost time. We should go get ready." He reached for her wheelchair, but she remained frozen, her eyes fixed on her past. Sarah didn't know if this would be the last time she ever saw Daniel. but she knew that after today, there would be no going back. She looked down at the empty space where her leg should have been and at the ugly scar on her right hand. A wave of overwhelming grief washed over her, yet she couldn't even find the strength to stop Leo from pushing her away. She was broken, a cripple. Even if this wedding wasn't happening, even if she were free, he would never want her now. Daniel felt her stare and looked up just in time to see Leo pushing her away. He was taken aback. He hadn't realized she was in a wheelchair. Was it from the accident? Had her injuries been that severe? Daniel's suspicions were confirmed when the ceremony began. He hadn't heard anything about Sarah since her accident. He never imagined that when he saw her again, things would be so drastically different. He couldn't see the extent of her other injuries. But even with his limited medical knowledge, he knew she would never be a surgeon again. A strange sense of melancholy washed over him. It had only been a few months, but their worlds had changed completely. On the stage, Sarah's expression was grim. She looked less like a bride and more like someone who had just lost a fortune. When Mrs. Vance had first learned of the pregnancy, she had been shocked, and her first instinct had been to tell Sarah to terminate it. Even though Sarah and Daniel were broken up, it was obvious she still had feelings for him. For Leo to try and trap her with a child was a recipe for disaster, especially now with her injuries. Mrs. Vance worried constantly about Sarah's state of mind. The biggest surprise was that Sarah had agreed to the wedding at all. Remembering where she was, Mrs. Vance smoothed her expression, placing Leo's hand over Sarah's and offering a hopeful plea for her to be good to her son. But Sarah didn't move, nor did she respond. Just as Mrs. Vance's expression began to sour, Leo stepped in to smooth things over, taking the handles of Sarah's wheelchair and positioning them both before the officiant. Despite the awkward start, the ceremony proceeded. Many of the traditional elements had been cut due to Sarah's condition, but the exchange of rings remained. The ring bearer brought the rings forward. Sarah took one, but as she went to place it on Leo's finger, she froze, staring at the diamond. It was the ring, the one she and Daniel had picked out together for their wedding. Here she was, finally at the altar, but with the wrong groom. Leo stood with his hand outstretched, his smile faltering as she whispered a name that wasn't his. "Daniel, will you marry me?" His smile completely vanished, but with so many people watching, he couldn't let himself fall apart. He forced a pained smile and whispered, "Sarah, it's time to exchange the rings." Sarah snapped back to reality and slid the ring, which was slightly too large, onto his finger. From his seat in the audience, Daniel had seen the whole thing, and he felt more confused by her than ever. Maybe it was true that you always want what you can't have. When he had loved her, she had never shown him an ounce of affection, taking his devotion for granted while saving her tenderness for Leo. Now, she had what she supposedly wanted, and he had moved on. So who was this tragic performance for? His mind drifted back to the reunion, to the tarot card he had drawn. Expectation leads to emptiness. Seeking nothing leads to abundance. He had expected so much from his life with Sarah, a happy home, a family. But he was always the one she was willing to sacrifice. Later, when he'd lost all hope for her, he'd married Chloe, partly out of spite, partly to make his grandfather happy. He had expected nothing more than a polite, respectful partnership, but Chloe had given him a world of love. His fortune had come true, and Sarah's. Lose her true love forever. Judging by her behavior, that had come true as well. But Daniel didn't believe she had ever truly loved him. He had been a habit, a convenience. She was used to him chasing her, giving her everything and asking for nothing in return. And now that he was gone, she claimed to love him. Who would believe that? Daniel didn't stay for the whole ceremony. Halfway through, Chloe started to feel sick, so they left early. She thought it was just the stuffy ballroom, but once they were outside, she felt even worse and started throwing up. She insisted she was fine, but Daniel was worried and took her to the hospital. After being transferred from the ER to the maternity ward and asked for the third time about her last menstrual period, it finally dawned on both of them. She was 2 weeks late. "Has it ever been this late before?" the doctor asked. Chloe shook her head. Her cycle wasn't always perfectly regular, but it had never been this late. To be sure, the doctor ran some tests. When the results came back confirming she was 4 weeks pregnant, Chloe still couldn't quite believe it. "Daniel," she said, her voice full of wonder. "I'm really pregnant." Chloe cupped his face in her hands and gave him a firm kiss, her smile so wide it crinkled the corners of her eyes. "Honey, you're going to be a dad." The sudden kiss caught Daniel completely by surprise. and his face flushed red. "What are you doing?" he stammered, pushing her away gently. "We're in a hospital." Luckily, they were in the maternity ward where such displays of affection were common. Neither of them had any desire to remain in Seattle a moment longer. They booked the next flight back to Austin. Chloe went to tell her parents the news, while Daniel went to his grandfather's to share their own good news. But when he entered the apartment, it was eerily quiet. His happy calls went unanswered. A sudden, sharp fear gripped him. He rushed to the bedroom and found his grandfather lying motionless on the floor. With trembling hands, he dialed 911, then called Chloe. Grandpa collapsed. He managed to choke out before breaking down. Her family rushed over immediately, and they all rode in the ambulance to the hospital together. As they waited outside the operating room, Chloe held Daniel tightly, letting him sob into her shoulder. "He's going to be okay," she whispered, stroking his back. "You have to be strong. You don't want her to wake up and see you like this." Daniel knew he needed to calm down, but the image of his grandfather lying on the floor kept replaying in his mind. Chloe's parents looked on, blaming themselves. They usually checked on Grandpa Miller every day. The one day they missed, this had happened. Finally, the light above the operating room door turned green, and the doctor emerged. He was accustomed to the sight of distraught family members. "You got him here just in time," he said calmly. The procedure was a success. He's weak original. 直到手术室亮起的红灯变绿，医生走了出来，见惯了手术室门口情绪崩溃的家属，都已经见怪不怪了。还好送来的及时，抢救很成功，只是老爷子身体弱，还得先住院观察一段时间。The light above the operating room door turned green, and the doctor emerged. He was accustomed to the sight of distraught family members and delivered the news calmly. "You got him here just in time. The procedure was a success. He's weak, though, so he'll need to stay in a hospital for observation for a while." Daniel's tension finally eased at the news. Chloe's parents went to handle the hospital bills, while Chloe stayed with Daniel, following the gurney to the recovery room. Grandpa Miller woke up 3 days later. Seeing the guilt etched on Daniel's face, he just sighed and gently wiped a tear from his grandson's cheek. "I'm just an old man, getting clumsy," his grandfather rasped, making a big fuss over a little fall. Daniel gripped his grandfather's wrinkled hand, shaking his head fiercely. "You're not old, Grandpa. You have to live for a long, long time. You have to see your great-grandchild be born, and you have to watch them grow up." At the word great-grandchild, a spark returned to Grandpa Miller's eyes. "A great-grandfather? Is that right?" he murmured, a faint smile touching his lips. "Well then, I suppose I'll have to stick around a while longer. Just like you said, Daniel. I have to see my great-grandchild born and watch them grow." When Chloe was 7 months pregnant, Daniel got a call from a friend back in Seattle with some news. Sarah had miscarried. It was a late-term miscarriage. The baby hadn't survived. She had never loved Leo, only agreeing to the marriage because of the pregnancy. With the baby gone, a strange, desperate hope began to bloom in her heart. The child was gone. She hadn't had a baby with another man. Did that mean she could still win Daniel back? Could he forgive her? But first, she had to divorce Leo. The more she pushed, however, the more he resisted. He refused to even consider it. With her physical limitations and Leo's seemingly devoted care, filing for a contested divorce was nearly impossible. All she could do was wait. The months dragged on, and then she heard the news. Chloe had given birth to a baby girl. That was the final straw. She couldn't wait any longer. That very day, she booked a flight to Austin. It was 8 o'clock at night when Sarah finally arrived at the Austin hospital. She looked so travel-worn and exhausted that when she appeared before Daniel, he almost didn't recognize her. It was only when she called his name, her voice hoarse and weak, that he connected the gaunt woman before him with the brilliant, composed surgeon he once knew. He glanced behind her, seeing no one else, and looked at her with surprise. "You came all this way by yourself." Sarah nodded. She had barely left her house since the amputation, but she had snuck away for this, to see him. It was her first time traveling alone since the accident, and the journey had been fraught with difficulties. Inaccessible curbs, narrow bollards on sidewalks that blocked her path, the frustrating struggle of trying to navigate an incline, rolling 1 foot forward only to slide 3 feet back. But all the exhaustion and humiliation of the trip vanished the moment she saw his face. Her heart was pounding with anxiety, but a flicker of hope ignited in her eyes. She looked at him and finally voiced the question she had carried for so long. "Daniel, I didn't have a baby with Leo. Can you ever forgive me?" Just as she finished speaking, her wheelchair was abruptly pulled backward. Chloe, her face a mask of displeasure, moved past her and sat down next to Daniel. "Ms. Jenkins," Chloe began, her voice dripping with ice. "On what grounds exactly are you asking that? As the ex-fiancée who betrayed him? As Leo Vance's current wife? Or as a shameless woman trying to use her disability to manipulate him?" Sarah was speechless, but Chloe wasn't finished. "And to come here in front of me, his wife, and say that, have you forgotten he's married? What exactly are you trying to do? Showing up here in the middle of the night? Trying to be a homewrecker? I never would have guessed the renowned Dr. Jenkins from Seattle had such low moral character." Then again, Chloe added cuttingly, "For someone who was willing to have another man's baby right before her own wedding, I suppose this isn't so surprising." Sarah's face flushed with anger and humiliation. As Chloe's verbal assault continued, she finally snapped. "This is between me and Daniel. It has nothing to do with you." Chloe scoffed, ready to fire back, but Daniel spoke first. "That's a strange thing to say," he said, his voice cold. "Chloe is my wife. You're here harassing her husband. How was that none of her business?" His words had drastically different effects on the two women. Chloe was instantly mollified, sitting contentedly beside him, savoring the way he had called her his wife. It was rare enough for him to say it, let alone as such a staunch defense in front of her rival. For Sarah, however, his defense of Chloe was more devastating than any of Chloe's insults. Her face went white with disbelief, her voice rising. "You're defending her? How could you?" Her accusation was cut short by the sound of a baby crying. And then she remembered the news that had brought her here in the first place. Chloe had a daughter, Daniel's daughter. The full weight of her foolishness crashed down on her. She watched as Daniel, who had just been so cold to her, instantly transformed, turning to gently scoop up his crying daughter from the bassinet beside him. He murmured softly to the baby, rocking her back to sleep, but not before shooting Sarah a furious glare for raising her voice and waking the child. Once the baby was asleep again, he carefully laid her back down. Then he turned to Sarah, his face hard and unforgiving. "You're not welcome here, Sarah. Leave." Sarah left the hospital in a daze, wheeling herself out into the cool night air. A full moon hung in the dark sky. She suddenly remembered that she had met Daniel on a night just like this, under a full moon. He had been cradling a tiny, dying kitten, frantically asking passersby for an open vet clinic since all the nearby ones were closed. When someone finally pointed him toward an emergency animal hospital, he had taken off at a dead run without looking where he was going and crashed right into her. He had apologized over and over. She'd seen the kitten and, understanding the urgency, had taken him to the clinic herself. But the kitten had been too small, too far gone. It didn't make it. Afterwards, he had carefully chosen a spot to bury the tiny creature and had cried quietly for a long time. She had gotten a message from her mentor and had to rush back to campus. Seeing him still there, grieving, she had simply handed him a tissue before leaving. And after that, he had started showing up everywhere, telling her he was in love with her. She hadn't accepted his advances, but he had been persistent, coming up with one creative new approach after another. Sarah had grown accustomed to his presence. The time he'd try to play hard to get, disappearing and then showing up with another girl, she had felt a brief flash of panic. But the love in his eyes was so obvious that she knew it was just a ploy for her attention. Eventually, they had gotten together. But then her mentor's health began to fail. She was so grateful for his guidance over the years. So when she learned his biggest regret was his son Leo's future, she had started looking out for him more. She was only trying to repay her mentor's kindness. She had never had romantic feelings for Leo. She had never intended to betray Daniel. And yet, here they were. She had been too arrogant, too certain that he would never leave. She had forgotten that nothing lasts forever, that one-sided devotion eventually runs dry. She had been wrong, and she had realized it far too late. Sarah wheeled herself out of the hospital, a thin, lonely figure disappearing into the night. Waiting for her just outside the entrance was Leo, his face pale, but his stance resolute. When he saw her, he forced a smile. "Sarah, I'm here to take you home. Sarah, I've come this far for you," he thought. Asterisk, "I'm never letting you go. Even in death, we'll be together." Asterisk back in the hospital room, Chloe gazed at her sleeping daughter, her heart full. Daniel gently tapped her shoulder. When she looked up, he whispered, Have you thought of a name for her yet? Not a first name, she said, shaking her head. My parents and I thought we should let your grandfather choose it, but we could pick a nickname. What do you think? He thought for a moment and nodded. Okay, any ideas for a nickname? Chloe shook her head again. My parents vetoed all of my suggestions. They said you should pick one. Daniel was curious what she had come up with, but her next words made him immediately side with her parents. Puppy, Sparkles, and Lammy. He ignored her hopeful expression. They were all either animals or shiny objects. His daughter would be mortified. Let's call her Annie, he said decisively. He wasn't great at names either, but at least Annie was a safe, classic choice. The next day, the nickname Annie was made official. Grandpa Miller, who had been recovering well, was overjoyed to be given the honor of choosing his great-granddaughter's first name. He spent all night looking through books before settling on one, Caroline. A classic name, full of strength and grace. Daniel loved it. No one mentioned the events of the previous night. The past was the past. It was time to look forward.